facilitating this evening. Interestingly, we're having a few technical difficulties, so hence the reason we're a little bit late getting started, and apologies for that. You'll see some notes in the chat, but what we'll need to do is, unfortunately, our OWL system is not working as we had hoped. So we're going to be moving kind of around the room to make sure that you can hear all of the speakers this evening. And so, you know what, we're just going to roll with it. So we appreciate your patience and your attendance this evening. So with that, I will turn it over to Megan.
Okay,
I should be able to hear you.
all right, great. So yes, and if you can't hear me online, please speak up. I would greatly appreciate that. I guess we will move to open meeting. We have a second.
Andrea Samara from CTISI will second.
All right, thank you. Okay, first up is our roll call. Shall we start in the room? Okay, well, I'm being motioned to myself, so we will start in the room and then move around to the Zoom chat. We do not have Glenn here today as the community co-chair. Let's see, Dave in the room, right? Actually, is there anybody else in the room? Yeah. Sorry, folks, just looking at my list here.
Andrea.
Okay, all right, so I'm just going to go down the list that's on the front slide. Christy?
Yes, I'm here.
Jordan? Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me that. Jordan is not in attendance. Tracy Frank, I believe we do not have online. Jesse Groves? Jesse? No, not seeing Jesse. Carl?
Here.
Thank you. Kate?
Here.
And I've heard from Andrea, but if you'd like to say here, that's great.
Here.
Okay. And then we normally go around the room as well for the.
In the room. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need to do online, but.
Okay. All right, so then we can start around introductions around the room. John, would you like to start us off with just a quick intro?
Hi, for those who know me, I'm John Morgan. I'm a public affairs officer with public affairs specialist for the District Corps of Engineers.
Mary Lyle, Kansas City District Corps of Engineers. Linda Balcom, Environmental Services, supports the Corps of Engineers.
Jeff Madsen, Portland District Office of Council.
David Fair, I'm with the Oregon Health Authority.
Dana Crosby, Oregon Health Authority.
Okay. Would either of you like to introduce yourselves? If you like. Thanks for being here. And my name is Megan Garrix. I am the incoming project manager on the Bradford Island project for the Corps. And I am the new co-chair for this RAP. And then typically we do not go through the extra. Okay, no. All right, so we will move on to the approval of minutes. Any comments on the minutes that were sent out from the last meeting?
I just had a question. Are we including all attendees in person and online in those minutes? Is that the intention?
We did include everyone who attended online, in addition to everyone who was in the room. I believe, Kate, but if there needs to be an amendment to them, then you guys can talk about that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, comments, or amendments to the old minutes? wish I'd said like last meeting's minutes. Okay, then hearing none, I move to approve the minutes.
I apologize. This is Kate again. I was just scanning did you get Tom and Diana Gordon in the in-person attendees for the last meeting? I heard Tom and Diana introduce themselves again
Yeah,
today. I just wanted to make sure they were on the list as well.
you know what, Kate, I think you're right. I don't think that they were listed on the in-person, and so we will make sure that we can amend that, but
Perfect. Thank you.
but Megan can ask for a motion to approve as amended.
And I will do so. I move to approve as amended.
This is Carl, I'll second.
And I think for these, we just need a second to pass. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, so motion passes. Thank you, Carl. Right, we can move on to old business. Okay, so the one note on old business that we have in the agenda today is voting on some operating procedures. These notes in the procedures, these were areas that previously were not specified. And so we are suggesting some language here for folks to consider. On the first slide here, this is specifically the areas that we're suggesting. So this is on final voting, or excuse me, this is on nominations of new appointees. The two areas are the committee, the nomination committee. So we, and I say we, this is the core had put together a suggestion for amount of time. And we had suggested 4 months prior to the elected month for nomination committee appointment. And then for other members nominated from the floor of subsequent RAB. And then finally, the election being held every 2 years. That might be a little fuzzy, just written down on its own on the slide. So if we want to advance a slide, this shows the text that's actually in the operating procedures. And you can see the track changes. The highlighted blue is where we previously just had specified months, and the red is the language that we've suggested. So we'll open it up for discussion.
Do any of the RAB members online have any questions, comments, opinions about the draft language?
No, I'm good. This is Andrea.
Okay. If there's no comments, questions, or concerns with this language, we can move to approve this. Would any members like to put in a motion to approve the amended language?
Andrea Samara, I make a motion to approve the language as amended.
There a second?
This is Carl, I'll second again.
Thank you, Carl. And Autumn, can you go back one slide? Perfect, yep, okay. Okay.
And from there is this one that we'll vote on.
Okay, Autumn, you can go forward one. For the membership. No, not at this time. This is just for discussion.
No, I mean for the on the previous slide, it wouldn't be voted on at this point.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, yes, it would.
Okay.
You got the second, but you need your votes.
Yes,
Yes, you are
I thought that was
correct.
the case. Okay. So apologies in the Zoom. Can we reverse one slide, please? All right, so hearing a motion and a second, let's have a vote from the RAB members. All those in favor?
Aye.
I,
Okay. Andrea, Christy, Kate. And
And any opposed? Okay, hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you all. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you for your patience on that. Next order of business is to discuss RAB membership. We currently have 2 empty seats on the RAB that we can choose to fill or not. Mr. Jerry Big Eagle has officially sent in his resignation. Mr. Tracy Frank has also said he will not be participating. So we can seek additional membership for the board. These can be a number of different areas. They could be tribal members, industry or commercial stakeholders. They could be fishers in the area, could be union workers for those that actually work at Bonneville or on Bradford Island itself. So we can just go ahead and open this up for discussion at this point. So I'll just add to the discussion just a little bit. Our tribal liaison at the Corps did reach out to the Cowlitz tribe. They confirmed that they have no plans to fill a seat behind Mr. Big Eagle at the time. That said, you know, I believe at least the opinion of the Corps that the tribes will always be welcome to join the RAB. The additional 2 seats do not have to be tribal members. The ultimate goal is to have a diverse membership on the RAB. That I know of, we don't have any industry, commercial, we don't have fishers, we don't have union workers on the RAB. So that is an opportunity that we could reach out to those groups. Or if it's a preference of the board, we could reach out to additional tribes. Are there any strong feelings from members of the RAB?
you're a quiet bunch tonight. I guess that's technically up to you then. Yeah. Decide how you want to proceed.
Alternatively, if Brad members want some more time to think about this, we could cover this topic in a subsequent meeting, either a month or 2 months from now. Whatever gives folks appropriate time to chew on this topic.
This is Carl. I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other at this point. Maybe some time to think about a little more is useful. Also, I think it's important to, fill the roles so that we're functioning most effectively. And I'm not overly concerned about the designation or the background, as long as the person or people are interested and engaged. So that's all I have to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. One note to add there, because you mentioned us still being able to function, not having these 2 seats, we will still be able to function as a RAB. We'll still be able to have a quorum. Okay, so the one thing I hear is that some time to chew on this would be helpful. So that's what I would recommend, is that we keep this on as a topic for the subsequent meeting. See if any additional thoughts have developed, and we can go from there. Okay. I believe we can move on to the next topic. We have a short presentation from EPA on the technical assistance grant.
Hi, thanks, Megan. This is Rich Francis, EPA Remedial Project Manager. I only have a couple of slides here, so I'll be fairly brief. First slide is we're going to talk a little generally about EPA's Technical Assistance Grant. The Assistance Grant Program provides money to community groups so they can pay for advisors to interpret and explain site conditions, reports, proposed cleanup plans, and decisions. These can involve historical records and data that's already been produced, remedial investigations, feasibility studies, proposed plans, all the way leading up, all the way through the entire circle process, depending on where we are. There is a number of things that it won't pay for, such as legal fees or the attendance of the recipients to the RAB, but it can pay for the advisor's attendance of the RAB in order to explain site conditions and other items to this group. Who can apply? Any community group or citizens association formed because of issues at the site, or if they are involved at the site, maybe they are, reaching out doing their own citizen investigations. If they are affected by contamination or cleanup at the site. So it's a pretty broad brush here of what types of citizens can apply. Who cannot apply are potential responsible parties, academic institutions, national organizations, political subdivisions such as states, cities, etc., or tribes also cannot apply for these. There are different funding mechanisms for participation in the Superfund site for those entities, or any groups or lobbying groups that receive money from these entities. So this is very broad overview of the technical assistance grant. If you Google EPA technical assistance grant, the website you see down at the bottom of your page will be the first one to pop up. And in that is a fact sheet, which I highly recommend people take a look at if you're interested in this. And we can also field some questions a little bit later if anyone has any as well. And I have actually, oh, there we go. We have, thank you very much for posting those into the chat. And we can move on to the next slide now, if that's okay. So getting a little bit into the Bradford Island Technical Assistance Grant, EPA is facilitating the tag process for the Bradford Island Superfund site. Laura Newson is the primary point of contact for this. I am also, I have also volunteered to take some project officer training so I can help this process along and help manage it after it's been awarded. We received a letter of intent from Columbia River Keepers to apply for this tag. And then we ran a public notice in the Columbia Gorge News on May 17th to announce the availability of the tag per the LOI received from Columbia River Keepers. After that May 7th news date, you now have 30 days. Other groups have 30 days to either join with Columbia River Keepers or submit their own letter of intent to apply for a tag at Bradford site. Um, you can join with them. There are benefits to joining with them, although there are other advantages to not. I would leave that up to everybody else. But after June 16th, all groups who've submitted a letter of intent to EPA have 30 days to submit their actual tab application for EPA to review and decide on a tag award. And it's pretty important that I note this, that there's only a single tag award given at one time for each Superfund site. So sometimes it's better to have more groups jump onto one tag award. That way there's no hard feelings if somebody gets awarded one and somebody else doesn't. And again, if you have any questions about this process, please contact Laura Knudsen. Her phone number is there. Her email address is also on the main Bradford Island webpage, as well as mine, Richard Francis, and you can see my phone number right there. That's all I really have. You know, if I can speak pretty broadly, if anyone has any questions on this, if there's something that I can't answer, I'll definitely write it down and pass it on to Laura and get an answer for you. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them.
So we'll start with any members of the RAB who have questions about the tag. You can raise your hand and we'll get your question addressed, and then we'll move on to anyone else who has any questions. Andrea, I saw your thumbs up, but do you have a question or are you good?
No, that was just, I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's making my job easier. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Again, reach out to myself or Laura Knudsen if you have any questions, and have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, Rich.
We are doing pretty well on schedule. Do we want to just ask any folks online or around the room?
Sure.
Yeah. Are there any folks around the room that had questions about the tag? To bring up? Okay, seeing none. How about online? Any other non-RAB board members that would like to put out a question, make a comment?
We've got one. Thank you, Dina. If Columbia River Keepers gets the tag, what is their role then?
Well, the Columbia River Keepers then will be the ones to hire the advisor and basically be the manager of the technical assistance grant. They'll be the ones producing invoices to EPA showing that their costs that they've incurred, and then EPA will then use the money from that tag grant to reimburse Columbia River Keepers. They'll also be in charge of coordinating the advisors' participation in RAB meetings or other public meetings that they feel would be necessary for dissemination of information to the general public, and other roles that they have laid out, or other entities that have applied for the grant, if they get awarded those, have laid out in their grant application. And I can say if somebody is having some trouble, or they're kind of hesitant to fill one of these out, we make ourselves available, EPA does, to any tag applicant. So feel free to reach out if you need somebody to help guide you through the process as well.
Great. Good. Thanks, Dina, for that question. Anyone else?
Okay. All right, so we can move on to our next topic. We have a presentation from OHA. And we want to move the computer.
Yeah, I'm going to move it. Yep.
Yeah. And just give us 1 sec, folks online, while we move our microphone.
No, you are not. Excuse me.
Okay, so can people hear me okay if I talk like this?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. So, well, thanks for letting me come and talk to you. I think, we'll be talking about our role, Oregon Health Authority's role at the Superfund site, and also the fish advisory, which is related to our role and part of it. Sorry.
Autumn, just say next slide and
Oh,
Autumn will
next-
advance it for you.
Next slide, please.
Great.
So I think hopefully by now, RAB members know what the Superfund, like some basics of what the Superfund process is. I mean, at the very highest level, it's the process for identifying a responsible party for a contamination at a site, and then and making sure that they clean it up with EPA oversight to make sure that it's done right and well. So aside from that major, like very high level, there's a lot of other smaller pieces within the Superfund process too. And one of those is there's a whole federal agency that came out of the Superfund law called the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or ATSDR. And they are like, they're kind of housed within the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. So they're like a federal public health agency that focuses on hazardous waste issues and toxic exposures. And so whenever a site is listed as a Superfund site, ATSDR is charged with doing a public health assessment, which is sort of like a human health risk assessment that EPA or that the Corps will also do, but it's focused on answering the question about whether people will be or could be made sick or have been made sick by contamination from the facility. So facility meaning like the site, the contamination at the site. And the way that ATSDR does its work is through these cooperative agreement grants with state governments. So Oregon Health Authority is sort of like ATSDR's contractors in this situation to do the work that ATSDR would do if they were here. So we will be the ones doing that public health assessment on behalf of ATSDR. And they will also review our work and sort of stamp it as certified, like as sort of certifying that it's the same as they would have done if they would have done it themselves. So we talked about Washington. The state of Washington also has one of these grants from ATSDR, and we anticipate that a lot of people from Washington are also affected by contamination from this site. So we did have we sort of, the three groups, ATSDR and the two states, sort of talked about it and decided that Oregon would be the ones to do it, since it actually is located in Oregon. So, but we are coordinating with our partners in Washington too. Next slide, please. So we have two roles. So that's our first role. The one I just described is to do this public health assessment, and I'll talk more about what that actually is in the next slide. The main outcome of that health assessment is a set of conclusions about health risk and recommendations. And those recommendations can be aimed at anyone. They can be aimed at responsible party or even individuals like who may come to visit the site. So, for example, we might have a recommendation, as just an example, to for the Army Corps to collect more samples somewhere, or we don't do too many recommendations about specifics of how to clean up, but we would make recommendations to that it is cleaned up to a certain level to reduce risk to a certain amount. And then recommendations to individuals would be things like a fish consumption advisory to reduce exposure. Just things that individuals can do to protect themselves while the place is still contaminated. So that kind of feeds into our second role, is our agency also issues fish consumption advisories, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. Okay, so next slide. So I've talked about risk a little bit, so I wanted to make sure to explain what I mean by that. So risk means the chance or likelihood or probability that something will harm or otherwise affect someone's health. So it's about probabilities and prospective looking. We'll talk more about that too in a little bit, but that's basically what I mean by human health risk. To differentiate also from, that's different from ecological risk. So other agencies will do the evaluate risk to the fish themselves or to birds or wildlife. Our focus as a public health entity is on human health. Okay, next slide. So these are the things that we look at when we're doing a public health assessment. This is how we evaluate the risk. So we are interested in what chemicals there are in the contaminated area. What is the contamination made of? How much is there? And then in what ways are people exposed? Like, is it from eating fish? Is it from contact with soil on the island itself or sediment? And where are the areas where people are coming into contact with that contamination? And another important part is for how long, like how often do people do certain behaviors? How often do they eat the fish? How often do they go on the island? And for how long? Okay, next slide. So some of those questions, like what the chemicals are, we answer those questions through our partnership with agencies. So it's environmental sampling is how we know what is in the environment. And that's done in this case by the Army Corps under the supervision of DEQ in the past, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, or now the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So that's environmental sampling tells you like how much of these chemicals like PCBs or lead or pesticides, for example, are in sediment or soil or fish. And that also tells us how much, like at what concentrations in those different things. Okay, next slide. So then the other part of that is how are people exposed? So we try to look at a conceptual, we call this a conceptual site model. We try to think about all the ways that someone might interact with the site. They might be fishing, and while they're fishing, they might get some sediment or water on their hands or in their mouths, and they might eat the fish. They might, if there's groundwater, like a spring or something on the island, people might drink that water. So we do work, and so next slide, please. So the way that we get that information is from community inputs. So this is where it's important for us to be engaged with the community, because the community knows better than we do how people use the site, when they go places, how often they go places, what kind of activities they do while they're there, how they interact with soil or sediment or fish. So these elements we really need to get from community members. There are some defaults sort of information about, like, if you're gardening, for example, how much soil you swallow in a day on average. So the EPA has a lot of information, like studies that they've done that answer that kind of a question, but we don't know. But no one but the community knows how often people go places or do those activities. Okay, next slide. So here are some limitations about what public health assessments can tell us. So like they said, the assessment is focused on health risk, which is the probability of a health problem happening. It's not about health outcomes. So sometimes when people hear the word health assessment, they think that might mean that we try to like count how many people have different kinds of cancers or how many people have different types of diseases in the area. And those are in the category of health outcomes. In cases where, so that's about how many people are already sick, like how many people are sick in the area. And that's not what our health assessment does. It's like I say, it's focused on the risk, the probability of something happening rather than what's already happened. And the reason for that, I think the reason for that is that we want to be, public health is all about being proactive and trying to prevent something from happening. So we wouldn't want, for example, we wouldn't want it to be the case that the Army Corps couldn't be required to do a cleanup unless a certain number of people were already sick, right? You wouldn't want that to be the case. So that's why we deal in risk and not in the outcomes. Okay, next slide. So this is what's coming up next. So we've already been trying to engage with community, and we've had some success. We've had lots of conversations with Yakama Nation and the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and we're trying to talk with other tribes also. We've invited them to talk with us. We do think that the tribes are probably the most affected, not the only ones affected by contamination here, but this is an area that is important for tribes for fishing. And so they're the ones that we've kind of focused on the most so far, but anyone who interacts with the site, we would like to talk to. And that will continue. We're continuing to try to engage community around this issue. The next thing, and after that, we're going to be estimating or calculating the health risks from the various ways that people are exposed to the contaminants, and that's kind of what I've talked about earlier about looking at the environmental sampling data and finding out from community how people interact with the site. Will be, and like I said, the end product of all of that will be a report, probably a pretty fat report, but we try to accompany those with some summary fact sheets that explain in shorter and plainer language, like what our main conclusions are, and those conclusions and the recommendations are kind of like the key instrument or key part of those reports. And there will be a lot of public engagement around that. There'll be a public comment period, and then we'll read all the comments and revise the report, and then there'll be a final one. And so then a lot of our work, which is still community engagement, is about communicating that risk, communicating what the findings are in that report, and making sure that all the right people who are affected by contaminants at the site know about it, and especially know about any recommendations that they might need to follow in order to be protected from the contamination. Okay, next slide. So kind of the one thing we know already about contaminants at the site is that eating the fish that are contaminated with PCBs from Bradford Island is the highest risk activity. We know that already. Back in the 2010s, we saw fish tissue data collected by the Corps and saw that PCB levels were very, very high in the fish. So at that time, we issued a fish consumption advisory back in 2013 about that risk. So with all of our fish advisories, there's three pretty important pieces of information. The first one is the geographical area that advisory applies to. So what's on the slide right now is a map of the area that the Bonneville Dam advisory applies to. It's from the dam itself upstream about a mile to where Ruckle Creek comes in. It's also right about on the Hood River, Multnomah County line on the Oregon side. That's where it ends upstream. And the next piece of information from an advisory that's important is what species of fish are affected by that contamination. And then the final piece is what is the actual meal recommendation? What limit on consumption do we recommend for those fish in that place? So next slide, please. So this is some information we're already working on our graphics and our ways to, we're trying to, even though this advisory has been in place since 2013, we know a lot of people don't know about it. And so we're trying to get the word out again about it and trying to do more outreach, making sure people are aware of it. So I'm going to kind of start in the upper right of this slide. So the first thing to know is that there are some fish that are healthy to eat from this area with low contamination. And that's important. I think it's always important to talk about the health benefits of fish consumption, because there are a lot of benefits to eating fish. And there's the omega-3 fatty acids. It's a healthy source of protein. It's for some people, it's an important source that is cheaper than a lot of other ways you can get meat. If you know how to fish, then you can catch them and eat them, and that's good. So we try to steer people towards the fish that are the healthiest, so that have all those benefits without the risks from contamination. And in this area, those are the migratory fish, the ones that are kind of just passing through, like salmon, American shad, and steelhead. These are migratory fish that are just passing through, and they're not in the area long enough to accumulate or build up dangerous levels of these harmful chemicals that are associated with the site. So we encourage people to go ahead and eat those fish, and there's no limit. The other group is, if you go down from there, you'll see lamprey, and that's an important species for tribes. I don't think there's a lot of people besides tribal members that eat lamprey, but it is very important for them. And we do know that there are some contaminants in lamprey, and because of that, we issued a fish consumption advisory on lamprey that applies to a really broad area. That applies to the whole Columbia River Basin on the Oregon side, because they're also migratory. They're migratory just like the salmon and the shad. They spend some of their life, they're born upstream, and then they go out to the ocean, spend some of their life out there, and then they come back. But because of the way that they live, they're kind of parasites on big fish out in the ocean. And because of that, they accumulate more contaminants than other migratory fish. So that's why we think the contaminant levels are higher in lamprey than they are in salmon, even though they're also migratory. So we have some, and for that we have a limit. It's not a do not eat, but it is a limit. But the most important part probably for this 1 mile stretch of the Bonneville Dam advisory is this red box here. These are the resident fish. These are ones that don't migrate and spend their whole lives kind of in a relatively small area. And here's some examples of them on the slide here. And for these, we recommend that no one eat any of these fish, of these resident species of fish that are caught from this 1 mile stretch, because the PCB levels are so high in those fish. I'll point out the sturgeon. Sturgeon are also technically a migratory fish, but because of how the dams work, they're not really able to traverse the dams the same way that the salmon and shad and steelhead can. There's a very small amount that moves downstream, but virtually none come upstream through the dam. So even though they would be migratory if it weren't for the dam, they sort of are resident fish in this case, in this sort of context. We also want to make sure that people know who is the most at risk, and that in this case is people who are or may become pregnant, and nursing mothers are at highest risk, because the PCBs really affect the way that the brain develops in young kids and in developing babies. So when a woman has a load of PCBs in her body from eating these fish, that gets passed on to the baby through the placenta and through breast milk. And if that happens at too high of a level, that can change the trajectory of how that baby's brain will develop. So that can mean kind of a lifetime for that child of having impaired brain deficits. It can be cognitive deficits, or just oftentimes it's behavioral issues like difficulty controlling impulses, and those kind of things. ADHD, those kind of symptoms. Okay, so those are for whom it's most important to pay attention to this advisory. Okay, next slide. Oh, I talked about this already. Yeah, so I did want to mention another fish advisory that's not the Bonneville Dam advisory, just so people know that how this fits in the context of other advisories we have in Oregon that are nearby. So on this map, you'll see on the left side there's a little red spot, and that is the 1 mile stretch I already talked about. That's the Bonneville Dam fish advisories, that 1 mile stretch where it's an actual do not eat advisory. We do have another fish advisory that applies to a much longer stretch of the river that goes, it picks up where the Bonneville Dam advisory leaves off 1 mile upstream from the dam, and it goes all the way up to McNary Dam. It's about 150 miles. So that's a big geographic area that this next advisory applies to. Okay, so next slide, please. So for that part, for that bigger area, this is the advice for the Middle Columbia advisory. So same as before, the salmon, steelhead, and shad are a healthy choice. And we encourage people to eat those without any limits. We didn't update this slide, but the lamprey here should really show as limited, similar to what's in the yellow box. Just like on the last slide, there is a limit on the lamprey. And the big yellow box, all of those same resident fish that I talked about on the last slide. In the last slide, those were all in the red box, remember, where it was a do not eat. In this case, it's the same species, but they're not as contaminated. The levels of contamination are lower in this bigger stretch of the river. And so that means that it's safe to eat more fish. So in this case, the limit is 1 meal per week of any of these species of fish. So you can eat however you want to think about it. You can think about it as 1 meal per week or 4 meals a month, however you want to break it up. And then in that bigger stretch, we do have a do not eat advisory on the northern pike minnow because they have a lot of mercury in them, probably unrelated to the dam. And Washington has a do not eat advisory for northern pike minnow in their whole state because they're very high level predators, and so they tend to build up a lot of mercury in them. So that's just to let you know that there's another advisory kind of in the general area if you go further upstream from Bonneville Dam. Okay, next slide. And if you want to reduce your exposure to contaminants and still eat fish, there are things you can do. So the PCBs that are in fish really build up in the fatty tissues. So if you clean the fish and eat the fillet only, and remove skin and some of the areas where fat is on a fish, like that belly fat and some of that builds up on the sides under the skin, you can reduce the PCB levels by about a half if you prepare a fish that way. That's enough to make a difference in the Middle Columbia advisory, those fish that are less contaminated in that larger area. But the fish that are right behind the dam in the Bonneville Dam 1 mile stretch, those fish are so contaminated that even cutting the PCBs in half would not be enough to make them safe to eat. So I think that's important to let you know. Also, mercury is in some of the fish in the Columbia River too, and that cannot be removed with these methods. That's kind of in the fillet muscle itself and not in the fatty stuff. Okay, with that, we'll go to the next slide, and then Dana will talk.
They should be able to hear you.
I can.
So beyond communicating the basics of the Bonneville Dam advisory, of which fish and where that advisory applies, we're also striving to balance our risk communication with positive messaging on healthy choices like salmon and the health benefits of eating fish. So I also wanted to mention that this work is in the context that the Bonneville Dam advisory is not a solution to the contamination at Bradford Island, but it's more of an interim measure to protect people's health until the pollution is cleaned up and the fish are safe and healthy to eat again. Next slide, please. So after the site was listed last spring,
our agency began to learn about the site itself. We made a site visit in the fall. We heard about a general lack of awareness of the advisory amongst local area fishers. And so we heard a clear need to work on raising awareness of this advisory. We convened a group of partners in January to discuss how to raise awareness of the advisory. From that group, we heard about the importance of signage and really involving the community in getting the word out. So this spring, after collaborating with the Washington Department of Health over the last several months, we are rounding out development of, what is that, 5 materials, including a 1-page flyer, 2-page fact sheet, signs and posters. And then we're still working on one more resource, which is a brochure that's focused on those most vulnerable groups. So pregnant people, those who may become pregnant, are nursing, and children under 6. Let's see. We also held another meeting with our group of partners last Thursday, and we discussed additional outreach ideas, and we're able to get some feedback on that last resource, that brochure. Next slide, please. So this is just an image of our sign design. This is about final. We are aware that that last line of the tagline is larger than the rest. So we're working on getting that fixed. But this is the design that we hope to have signs displaying around the advisory area. Next slide, please. And then going into summer, we're looking for ways to increase our outreach efforts in communicating this advisory. We're looking for opportunities to table or present at in-person events and support partners in sharing the advisory through existing communications channels, such as newsletters or social media. If any of the attendees here have additional ideas for that, we would welcome those. Next slide. And then these are the shortened URLs to OHA's web pages, both on the Bradford Island Public Health Assessment. So we'll be updating that as we go forward through this process. It's where we'll have eventually a public comment version of the document that we produce will be posted there. And then that second short link is our general fish advisory landing page. So you can access more information on the Bonneville Dam Advisory or the Middle Columbia Advisory at that webpage there. So yeah, if there are additional ideas for fish advisory outreach or other comments, you're always welcome to send us an email to this address. Both Dave and I here are the ones checking that. So that's probably one of the best ways to get in touch with our program. And I think that email is not quite correct. Maybe we can put the right one in the chat for the online attendees. And then for in-person, we did put our business cards around the room, and that we have confirmed that email is right. So
So what is the correct one?
so it's the same as that,
Mhm.
but it has the ODHS in front of OHA.
All right, we'll get this in the chat here momentarily, guys.
Anything else to add?
I don't know, I'll just. Dana, I meant to say this also, but Dana did a good job saying it, that the advisories really are an interim measure. Like we don't, the goal is not to have fish advisories, right? The goal is to have clean fish so that you can have the benefits of eating the fish without the risks. So we do consider them an interim measure. Like the long-term goal is to have the cleanup successful, so that we don't need the advisory, at least not such a stringent one as a do not eat.
Okay, well, thank you both for that. Do any of the RAB members have any questions for Dave or Dana?
This is Carl. I have some questions.
Go for it, Carl.
I wondered in determining the recommendations, how many meals to eat, what type of fish. I know it's an elaborate calculation, but I wondered what estimates, what numbers did you use for one, the acceptable cancer risk level, such as 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000, and two, what was the assumed fish consumption rate, the number of grams per day?
Good questions. So when we're setting up when we're calculating a fish advisory, you may be thinking, for example, I know in the 2011 sort of timeframe, there was a lot of work in Oregon to incorporate tribal fish consumption rates into the how water quality standards are made. And if you're making a water quality standard where you have a target fish tissue concentration, then you have to have an assumption about how much fish people eat in order to get that number. In this case, in the case of a fish advisory, we're solving for a different variable in that equation, which is the consumption rate. So in this case, so for a fish advisory, we don't make any assumptions about how much people do eat fish. We just we calculate how much they can eat safely. So it's the same looking equation with the same variables, but we're just solving for a different variable than when we're doing a water quality standard. If that makes sense. So does that help? So for the advisory, we don't make assumptions about how much fish people eat. When we're doing the public health assessment, when we're going to try to figure out what the risk is to people, in that case, we will make an assumption about how much fish people eat. And for that, we're looking at some different sources. One of them is a document created by the Nez Perce tribe that incorporates their estimate of how much of kind of an aspirational fish consumption rate. And we'll probably have actually a range of risk numbers depending on how much people will eat. We'll probably do more than one fish consumption rate that we'll use in that public health assessment. But in that case, that's solving for a different variable, right? In that case, we're looking at, well, what is the risk if you eat this much fish and there's this much contamination in the fish?
Do you use a number for the cancer risk level?
We will in the public health assessment, we will. And in that case, again, we don't really have like a target cancer number, and rather we're trying to figure out what the cancer risk actually is. Like if you eat this much fish and there's this much contamination in the fish, what would your cancer risk be? That's what we're figuring out in the public health assessment. For the fish advisory, we actually don't use cancer risk as a baseline, as a factor. We use that the children's brain development as that's the toxicity endpoint that we're concerned about. That's the health effect that we're concerned about when we calculate that meal recommendation. And because PCBs are pretty potent at changing brain development, that turns out to also be pretty protective against cancer, which happens at higher doses. So does that make sense?
I guess so. I'll have to think about it. I just wonder, I mean, you've already done advisories, like you say, for, with different recommendations on what is safe to eat versus what is unsafe to eat of different species from Bonneville up to McNary Dam. And, I just wondered what rates you used or whether that resulted in an estimated risk of cancer or non-cancer effects that corresponded to the number of meals that you recommended. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
If someone follows our recommendations, if someone follows our fish advisory recommendations, then they would have no more than 3 in 100,000 cancer risk from eating those fish. That's
3 in 100,000.
Yeah.
That's a lot higher than 1 in 1 million.
It is. one of the things that we balance with the fish advisory that's different from other types of risk assessment is that we're balancing that against the health benefits of fish consumption. So in Oregon, the two things that kill the most people are cancer and heart disease. And fish, the omega-3 fatty acids in fish are a very potent benefit against heart disease. So we're trying to balance the risk from contaminants, which can cause cancer, against the really well-documented benefit of omega-3 fatty acids that are protective against heart disease, which is the other major killer of Oregonians. So that's the main reason why when we calculate our fish consumption advisories, we do it based on the risk to young children and their brain development instead of cancer risk. Cancer risk is something like cancer is a disease that is unfortunately very common, and it mostly happens as people get older. Whereas the health effect of impaired brain development is something that a person would live with for their whole lifetime, like from the time they're born, like all of their lives. And so that's one reason why we sort of prioritize that health effect over cancer when we calculate our fish advisories.
Right. But another question, have you attached a numerical figure to the amount or degree to which eating fish benefits your heart or counteracts heart disease?
It's hard to do it's hard to put those numbers into the same, to come up with the number that's the same units, where you can like put them on a balance next to each other and be comparing apples to apples. There hasn't been, no one's really found an excellent way to do that so far.
Right, but you kind of suggested that they did, because you just had a slide with the balanced scales of the risks from eating fish and the benefits from eating fish.
Right. We do that in a qualitative way, not a quantitative way. We don't have a way to do it like quantitatively with numbers, so we do it. It's qualitative. So we're I don't know how else to say that. Qualitative.
Okay. And I guess another question. I appreciate your comments that advisories are an interim step, and in fact not the solution to polluted water. But I'm just curious, in your experience, how many advisories have been lifted because the fish became safe to eat?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not common. And I'm not sure if it's always because contaminant levels are staying the same. Sometimes it's because we don't have, our fish advisory program doesn't have resources to do fish tissue testing. So the way that we get data is always from our partner agencies like DEQ or EPA, and they're collecting fish tissue for a different reason. They're doing it in conjunction around some kind of a cleanup site like this, like a Superfund site. In this case, we got the data from Army Corps because it was a cleanup site. And we don't have any funding to go back years later and test fish again to see if the levels have gone down. If that were to happen, we would lift an advisory if we saw that levels had gone down. And a good thing about Superfund sites is that there is a built-in process, like a 5-year review, where there's testing to check whether or not the remedy was successful. So there is a built-in sort of guarantee that we will get fish tissue data in the future after the cleanup to be able to check whether it worked. And if it does, then we can reduce the restrictiveness of it. May never go away all the way, because there are other contaminants in fish like mercury that are unrelated to the Superfund site. But if the PCBs were gone or much reduced, at the very least we could make the advisory less restrictive and allow for more consumption.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned that other agencies are looking at the non-human risks. I assume that's, say, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, Washington Department of Ecology.
Yeah, or it'll be, that has kind of its own, they call it the ecological risk assessment, which will be part of the work that Army Corps will have to do under EPA's supervision.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's helpful. And I should say that, I try to eat salmon once a week. I believe in its benefits, but I've also have been working on the issue of contamination for 20 years now. So I know the problem, and I too balance it against the benefits of salmon once a week. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carl. Kate, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a question, and I know that this has come up in other spaces, but I'm just wondering about it, making sure that it's clear when there's the limit that's recommended, for example, for the lamprey, that that is the full amount for the month and does not include any other, potential contamination. So I know there's other advisories in the Mid-Columbia that may overlap. And so just kind of like thinking about a way to make sure it's clear to folks that if they're eating more than one type of fish, that's, got a limit recommendation, that it's either or for the monthly advisory and not a combination of the two or anything like that.
That's right. Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. Do any of the other RAB members have any questions for Dana or Dave? Okay. We do have a question from Dina, if you'll indulge. So her question was, are the presentation / public outreach efforts limited to near the site area, or can they also be provided in urban areas where people who fish on the weekends may see it?
Yeah, so I mentioned our group of partners that we've convened to help us shape this advisory messaging and the materials that we've created. So that group of partners includes organizations that I think do represent people who live closer to Portland in that urban area. Off the top of my head, that includes Multnomah County's Lower Willamette Fish Advisory person, who's been a great resource for us and is going to help us get the word out through her usual communication channels. I think she's going to help us promote this advisory closely with the other advisory that she raises awareness of. And then we also have contacts at a few other culturally specific organizations. Off the top of my head, I think that includes Latino Network, Slavic Family Media Organization, ERCO, Asian Health Community Services, and probably others that I am not recalling at the moment. So yes, definitely our outreach efforts do extend well beyond the site area and beyond even the Cascade Locks area as well. We hope to reach tribal fishers that may be traveling to the area from Washington, or even as far as the Nez Perce Reservation, Idaho. So we hope that this outreach is, we hope that we reach a broad audience well away from the site itself. And we're always, like I said, open to additional suggestions for how to get the word out. I think, like I kind of outlined a few slides back, we've really been working on this. We've really been having a concerted effort around this for probably six months or so. So we're definitely in the early stages of figuring out how to get the word out and reaching as many partners as possible. So I see that you have an acronym after your name, PNWA. I'm not sure what that organization is, but if you are interested in partnering with us to do some outreach around this, we definitely welcome you to reach out. And then the same goes for presentations in general. We're available to present similarly like we did tonight at other places too.
Okay, any other questions? I was just about to tell you. So Dina's with the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association.
Awesome.
Okay. All right, I don't think I see any other hands up. So Megan, I think we can throw it back to you.
Okay. Are folks able to hear me from here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Hey, Autumn, can you hear Megan?
No.
No, okay, I'm gonna move. Apologies, folks. Okay.
So the next item on our agenda actually does not have a slide. We can remain on the slide that's currently up. Next one is an update on FFA negotiations. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Matson. Right there.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Jeff Matson, Portland District Office of Counsel. The USACE co-chair, Megan, just thought I'd be available to answer any questions that the RAB members have on the Corps of Engineers negotiations, ongoing negotiations with EPA, Washington Department of Ecology, and Oregon Department of Environmental Quality with respect to the Federal Facilities Agreement, the big interagency agreement under Section 120 of CERCLA. Although the contents of the negotiation are confidential among the parties, I can report that the parties are making progress. We were able to meet for a couple days in person 2 weeks ago, and most recently virtually with the negotiating representatives. And some progress is definitely being made, which we're optimistic about. But I'll pause for any questions from RAB members and then maybe the public at large.
Yeah, Kate, go for it.
Yeah, it's great to hear there's some progress happening. Is there any update on the time frame for completion and signing of the FFA?
Sure, Kate. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think it's both the Corps of Engineers, EPAs, and the states hope to get to some type of agreement in principle for the entire FFA in the month of June. I'm hopeful we can get there. There remain a couple obstacles, ongoing coordination between headquarters EPA, OECA, and Department of Defense, Office of General Counsel. However, it is, especially the federal parties, hope that we can get to some type of agreement in principle by the end of June. Fingers crossed.
Great, and that would include a resolution with the tribal engagement with Yakima Nation in that situation as well. Would that be resolved before signing the FFA?
Yeah, Kate, two separate issues. I'm not privy to it, but the Army has extended a term sheet, I believe, a memorandum of understanding for coordination directly with the Yakima Nation and other interested tribes directly. I think that conversation is still being carried out between the Yakima Nation and Army, specifically Army General Counsel. That's not the office I work in. And then there is the Yakima Nation served upon the Corps of Engineers and Department of Army notice of intent to sue under the CERCLA citizen supervision. Those 60 days expire kind of toward the end of June. Theoretically, the Yakima Nation could file a lawsuit, I think, as early as approximately 1 July. But so kind of two separate issues there.
Well, I guess I asked the question because maybe I misunderstood. I believe in a previous meeting, you had mentioned that one of the issues that the FFA was held up on was an attempt to get tribal engagement, and it was up at the Washington level. So I thought there was some connection there with the process of getting the FFA completed.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that the language in the Federal Facility Agreement that speaks to the FFA parties coordination and consultation with other entities that aren't party to the FFA. The language that we're discussing is kind of been meeting with some initial approval. So I'm hopeful that the FFA could be, FFA parties could kind of reach agreement in principle on that language. However, there would probably be some type of separate mechanism for direct tribal engagement with the Corps of Engineers if one or more tribes are still pursuing that. Again, I think as to the FFA, there's progress and I'm optimistic that the language in the FFA will be acceptable to all the FFA parties. And then whether or not one or more tribal nations take the Corps up on a memorandum of understanding for kind of direct coordination and consultation, that's kind of remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. Any other questions for Jeff about the FFA negotiations? Yeah, Laura.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to add that we haven't heard anything on the term sheet or MOU in many weeks, and we haven't heard anything from Department of Justice since we filed that NOA. So we're kind of getting radio silence. It sounds like that it's good that the federal, the government and states are meeting and negotiating on the FFA, but our attorneys, the last time we met with them recently, we haven't heard anything in a long time.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Jeff? Okay. Thank you. And Dave and Dana, I wanted to let you know that Christy Baptiste, one of our RAB members, mentioned in the chat that she'll contact you to get the fish advisories out into the Nez Perce community. Okay.
Thank you.
And we can help facilitate that as needed. So, okay, Megan.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that update, Jeff. We can move on to talk about the next item, which is the upcoming RAB meeting dates. Currently, the RAB has chosen to meet monthly. So what we have here are just some potential dates that we could be meeting in the future. I think it's sort of desired, at least on the administrative side, to try to start deciding these a little bit sooner so it makes it easier for coordination. It also helps us produce slides quicker, get information out to the RAB board quicker. So I will open it up to folks, assuming that we're still looking to meet every month. Are there any concerns with dates that are, let's at least start with July. But is there any concern with the date of July 11th or any desire to push that to a separate date?
Go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, I should be muted. I'm getting over a cold and I just cleared my throat.
All right. Well, hearing nothing from the RAB members, does that mean that everyone can make July 11th? Okay, I see a thumbs up from Kate.
If RAB members like, we could do a motion and a vote on that, if that's desired.
This is Carl. I make a motion that we accept these dates for the forthcoming future RAB meetings.
I'll second.
And I don't know, for this one, a roll call.
Yeah, just, I would just to make sure that everyone can make those dates.
Yeah. And noting that we do have a couple members that aren't here today, so we will need to follow up with them, but I'm gonna just go down the roster of RAB members for a roll call vote. Christy,
Yes.
Jordan's not with us. Is Jesse with us? No, okay. Carl,
Yes, okay.
Kate,
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
Thank you all, and we'll follow up separately with Glenn, Jordan, and Jesse. Another just related topic I wanted to bring up underneath this this slide is potential topics for future meetings. We do have our old business and our new business. Some of these are just regular. Such as there was an expressed desire, I believe there was expressed desire at a previous meeting for FFA negotiations to be a regular business item for the time being. And there was a desire for the Corps to provide project meeting updates at every meeting. Is there anyone from the RAB who has other topics that they think they would like to see either at the next meeting or upcoming meetings?
Yeah, Kate, go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, I just have heard it mentioned a couple times, discussion about interim actions. And this may be a moot point if the FFA is signed by the end of this month, and hopefully if that happens, we would be getting updates before the next meeting. But yeah, just wondering if we sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I was thinking about the updates. If we might. Oh, I just totally went blank there, y'all.
You were going down the road of interim actions.
Oh, yeah. If we might just be able to, thank you. If somebody could explain a little bit more like what the RAB role would be with that, or what that might look like if it indeed, I mean, I assume that was something that would be prior to the FFA. If I'm not understanding that correctly, I guess I just don't understand, like that's been referred to a couple times, but it'd be helpful to understand that a little bit more.
Hey, Kate, this is Jeff Mattson, Portland District Office of Counsel. I think I heard you mention that an FFA being signed and in effect the end of this month. I just want to be crystal clear. I think the Corps of Engineers and EP and the states are hopeful that we'll get to agreement in principle, and so that's kind of lawyer speak for the parties have some rough agreement as to the terms and conditions and language, but the federal facility agreement will be there'll be a public comment and review period for it. EPA and the Corps of Engineers will then carefully consider the comments on the FFA itself, I think including the site management plan, and then there will probably be some type of response to comment document that goes out, and then I think the order is the officials sign it, which is really weird to me, and then it goes out for public comment, and then it goes into effect. But that's a long way of saying that process will take a long time, and the federal facility agreement will not be in effect and governing removal or remedial actions for a number of months. When I was speaking before, I was just meaning agreement in principle, not a fully effective and enforceable federal facility agreement.
Got you. Thank you for that clarification, Jeff. And I think then, yeah, I think like maybe if somebody could help us understand what we're talking about when we talk about interim actions, like that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. That sounds like a great topic for a future meeting.
Any other potential topics other than the ones that Megan mentioned that would be standing, and Kate's suggestion about the interim actions? That you want to put on the table, RAB members?
I'll also just quickly jump back to, we discussed earlier, addressing RAB membership at a future date. So we'll plan to bring that one back, as a topic.
And just as a side note, this isn't a static thing, right? I think RAB members, if you think of topics, if you didn't have it at the tip of your tongue this evening, you can always let Megan and Glenn know what those potential topics might be for an upcoming RAB meeting.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we can move on to the next agenda item then, which is the Chorus project update. And I'll provide that tonight. I just have a verbal update for folks. So Jeff provided some great information about the ongoing FFA negotiations. At the last meeting, we did mention that we were hopeful to have that meeting the week following directly after the RAB. And unfortunately, that was just very difficult with the number of folks that we had involved in getting their schedules together. So based on that, there's not a lot that I can share tonight. That said, I can tell you that there is a work plan being developed for river work. Let's see, we have also, we are working to bring on a new consulting firm. And they're going to be brought on board to assist us with this project. And then just adding to what I mentioned earlier, from what we spoke about at the last meeting, we had talked about the possibility of providing an update on our schedule. Based on where we are with the FFA negotiations, unfortunately, it's too mature at this point to share any details on the schedule. We are really making good progress. I agree with Jeff's assessment that we have done some good work on the FFA negotiations and the site management plan. But until we are a little bit more mature on that, we're not going to be able to share the schedule. And so unfortunately, I have to kick that can down the road, and I apologize for that. I believe, yes, just checking to my notes. That's all I have for a core project update, but it is open for any questions or comments from the RAB. And I see a request to go back to the agenda slide on the Zoom. That might be old.
I think Autumn's, no, I did that.
Oh, okay.
So people would know. Okay. While you were, thank you, Autumn. I don't see any hands up.
Okay. Not seeing any questions or comments from the RAB. We'll open it up to the greater audience. Any questions or comments from the community?
I don't see any hands up.
Okay, seeing none. All right, so our last item on the agenda is an open comment period. I believe this also starts with RAB members for open comments. Is that correct? Thank you. Yes, so open comments open to RAB members. Okay, seeing none, then I will open it up to the community for any comments.
Dina, we saw your comment about the presentation at your conference, and we will follow up with you about that. I don't see any hands up.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of our agenda. Do we have a motion to close the meeting?
This is Andrea. I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
Thank you, Andrea. Any second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, so I believe with that brings our meeting to a close, and I want to thank everyone for their attendance and their engagement and their comments today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you, everyone.